On what should have been a peaceful evening in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, a family's life was changed forever in a moment that still haunts the community. 34-year-old Charmaine Forpool, a loving mother of 5, was brutally attacked and murdered right in front of her young children. The horror of that night isn't just in the violence, but in the deep emotional scar left on her children, who witnessed the unimaginable. It was around 8 p.m. on a quiet Tuesday in April 2024. The stillness of the evening was pierced by the screams of children as first responders raced to a home where a domestic situation had escalated to lethal levels. The children, terrified and helpless, stood by as their mother, someone they loved, relied on, and looked up to, was taken from them in the most violent way. Police arrived at the residence to find Charmaine suffering from multiple stab wounds. Despite efforts to save her, she was pronounced dead at the scene. The alleged attacker, her boyfriend, 31-year-old Anthony Michael James, who had reportedly fled before officers arrived. But the damage was already done. 5 young lives were shattered in a matter of minutes. These were not just any children. They were Charmaine's whole world. Ages ranging from a toddler to early teens, they had already faced life's difficulties with their mother by their side, only to have that safety net ripped away in front of their eyes. This was more than just a domestic dispute. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time. Neighbors described Charmaine as a warm-hearted woman, always friendly, always putting her children first. She had this light, one said. You could see it in how she cared for her babies. She didn't deserve this. Those who knew her are left grappling with an aching absence and the trauma that now clouds her children's future. In the immediate aftermath, the children were taken to a safe location, but questions lingered. How did it escalate so quickly? Were there signs? Could someone have stepped in sooner? These are the haunting questions that remain unanswered, and they echo in the hearts of many across the community. As the story broke, people across Minnesota and beyond were shaken. This wasn't just another crime headline. It was a brutal reminder of the very real dangers of domestic violence and the lives it can shatter in an instant. For many, it was a wake-up call that behind closed doors, suffering often goes unseen. Authorities quickly launched a manhunt for Anthony James, urging the public to come forward with any tips. Community members rallied in support of the children, organizing donations and counseling efforts. In moments of despair, people came together not just to grieve, but to try to rebuild what was lost. This story isn't just about a crime. It's about a woman who loved fiercely, who lived for her children, and whose life was stolen in a moment of rage. It's about the silence that too often surrounds domestic violence, and the courage it takes to break that silence before it's too late. As we tell Charmaine's story today, we do so with the hope that it won't be forgotten, that her memory will shine as brightly as the love she gave to her children, that her name will be spoken not just in mourning, but in a renewed call for protection, awareness, and justice for victims everywhere. Before tragedy struck, Charmaine Forpool was known simply as a dedicated mother, a supportive friend, and a warm presence in the Grand Rapids community. At 34 years old, she was raising 5 children on her own, balancing the demanding responsibilities of motherhood with grace and perseverance. Her life wasn't always easy, but she met every challenge with a quiet strength that inspired those around her. Charmaine had grown up in Minnesota and stayed close to home to build a life for her children. She valued stability, love, and structure in their lives. Friends and neighbors often describe her as gentle, kind-hearted, and devoted. She wasn't loud or flashy, just someone who gave her all to her family and made sure her kids always came first. Each of Charmaine's children had their own unique personality, and she embraced them all with unconditional love. Whether it was helping with homework, organizing birthday parties, or just spending quiet evenings at home, she created a safe and nurturing environment for them. Her home wasn't perfect, but it was full of warmth and care, the kind of space children need to grow and thrive. Despite the financial and emotional toll of being a single mom, Charmaine never allowed hardship to define her. She was resourceful, often finding ways to stretch every dollar and keep her children clothed, fed, and enrolled in school. And even when things got tough, her smile rarely wavered. It was a reflection of the strength she carried inside. Those who knew Charmaine say she had a calm and steady way about her. She wasn't one to speak poorly of others, even when she had reason to. She tried to keep peace in her home and sought love, companionship, and support like many people do. It's likely this desire for connection led her into a relationship with Anthony Michael James, a relationship that would eventually spiral into violence. Unfortunately, like so many victims of domestic abuse, Charmaine kept her struggles mostly private. While those close to her may have sensed tension, few could have imagined how dangerous things had become. And as is often the case, her commitment to keeping her family together may have kept her from seeking the help she needed. Charmaine Forpool wasn't just a name in the news. She was a person with dreams, hopes, and deep love for her children. She was doing her best in a world that often makes it difficult for single mothers to feel safe or supported. Her story deserves to be told in full, with heart and with truth, so that others can understand the human cost of domestic violence and the strength it takes just to survive each day. It was the morning of June 26, 2024, a Wednesday that began like any other for Charmaine Forpool and her 5 children in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. The sun had barely risen over their quiet residential neighborhood when Charmaine and her kids began to stir. They were likely getting ready for a typical summer day. Breakfast, cartoons, maybe a trip to the park. But behind the scenes, a much darker reality was quietly building. Around 7 a.m., police say Charmaine was at home with her children when Anthony Michael James, her 47-year-old partner, arrived at the house. Tension had been growing in their relationship, and though the full extent of the conflict isn't publicly known, it's clear that what followed was an act of horrifying violence. Armed with a knife, Anthony confronted Charmaine in the presence of her children. The situation escalated quickly. Authorities later described the incident as a domestic violence dispute that turned fatal. In a terrifying attack, Anthony allegedly stabbed Charmaine multiple times while her children watched in shock and terror. The horror of witnessing their mother's murder is something no child should ever endure. After the stabbing, Anthony fled the scene. A call to 911 was made shortly after the incident, and emergency responders rushed to the home. When they arrived, they found Charmaine in critical condition. She was immediately taken to hospital, but the injuries were too severe. Despite the efforts of medical professionals, Charmaine Forpool was pronounced dead shortly after arrival.
Newsday also breaking: a man charged with murder in the stabbing death of a Cleveland mother.
And the attack happened right in front of her children. New at 6, our reporter Stephen Hernandez speaks to one of the victim's sisters who has a message she wishes she could send.
I was like 18 in this picture.
Sky Harmon can't help but scroll through years worth of texts with her older sister, Charmaine Forpool. But there's still one text that hasn't been sent and will never be read.
I know you playing. This gotta be a dream.
Forpool died in a brutal stabbing at her home on West 57th Street last Thursday night. Sky and her friend Tahira Till spoke to 19 News in support of a woman that showered everyone around her with her love.
Seeing her picture posted on everybody's social media, I can't believe it.
Today, Cleveland police confirmed the suspect, Charles F. Barkley, was arrested over the weekend and charged with murder. Officers say Barkley and the victim were in a brief romantic relationship together. All 5 of her children were there when it happened. The youngest, just 7 years old, now doesn't have any parents at all.
He doesn't really fully understand like his mom's gone yet, and it's just so sad they have to go through that at a young age.
For Sky, her older sister was someone to look up to, a rock.
When I need something, that's who I'm FaceTiming, like how I make this, how I do this, I can't do that anymore. It's like who I got.
Part of the plans for this week include a balloon release in Forpool's honor on Tuesday evening. It's one of many gestures for a person that meant so much to so many.
It hurts because I know I'll never hear from it.
In Cleveland's Old Brooklyn neighborhood, Stephen Hernandez, 19 News.
Meanwhile, a manhunt began for Anthony Michael James. Authorities described him as armed and dangerous and asked the public for help locating him. They distributed his image and warned that he should not be approached. His flight from the scene only added to the urgency of the investigation and the fear that he could harm others. That same day, law enforcement located and arrested Anthony without incident in Minneapolis, several hours away from Grand Rapids. Though he had tried to get away, Justice was swift in this case. He was taken into custody and later charged with second-degree murder without premeditation. The children, now motherless and traumatized, were placed in the care of family members and Child Protective Services. Their well-being became a top concern for authorities and advocates alike. In the days that followed, the community came together in grief, holding vigils and raising support for the children left behind. What happened on June 26 was not just a tragic moment. It was a breaking point that left a permanent mark on Charmaine's family, her neighborhood, and all who heard her story. The events of that day serve as a harsh reminder of how quickly domestic violence can turn deadly and why intervention, awareness, and support are so urgently needed. The moment Charmaine Fourpool's life was taken, the Grand Rapids Police Department sprang into action. With 5 young witnesses, her own children, present at the scene, investigators immediately understood the magnitude and urgency of the case. Not only was this a brutal act of domestic violence, but the trauma imprinted on those children would shape the rest of their lives. Law enforcement knew they had to move quickly. Officers immediately secured the crime scene, gathering evidence from inside the home. The children, though shaken, were carefully questioned with compassion and support from trained professionals. Their accounts confirmed what officers already suspected. This was a deliberate, targeted act carried out by someone close to Charmaine, someone she had once trusted. The suspect, 47-year-old Anthony Michael James, had fled before officers arrived. But he wasn't a stranger to law enforcement. He had prior convictions, including a notable 2019 domestic violence case in which he had pleaded guilty to a felony-level offense. That history added a chilling context to the crime and gave investigators even more reason to believe he could be dangerous and unpredictable. Within hours, a statewide manhunt was underway. Authorities circulated Anthony's photo and issued warnings to the public. While there was deep fear for public safety, there was also determination. Law enforcement was committed not only to finding him, but also to preventing any further harm. Every passing hour mattered. It didn't take long. Later that same day, on the evening of June 26, 2024, Anthony was found in Minneapolis, over 200 miles from the crime scene. Thanks to coordinated efforts between Grand Rapids Police, local departments, and the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, Anthony was taken into custody without incident. His arrest brought a small but vital sense of relief to Charmaine's family and community. Following his arrest, Anthony was transported back to Itasca County and formally charged with second-degree murder without premeditation. According to court records, the case was strong, built on witness testimonies, physical evidence, and Anthony's violent past. It was clear he posed continued threat, and prosecutors moved swiftly to ensure he remained in custody while awaiting trial. Though Anthony's arrest marked the first step toward justice, it was only the beginning of a long road. For Charmaine's children, healing would take years. For the investigators and advocates, the case was a sobering reminder of the stakes involved in domestic abuse cases. And for the wider public, it was a clear call to look closer, speak up sooner, and protect those most vulnerable from violence that often hides in plain sight. In the days following Anthony Michael James' arrest, the legal process began to unfold with swift determination. Prosecutors in Itasca County charged him with second-degree murder without premeditation, based on a mountain of compelling evidence, including witness testimony from Charmaine Fourpool's children and the physical trail left behind. The courtroom would become the next battleground for justice, not just for Charmaine, but for her children and the entire Grand Rapids community still reeling from her loss. The initial court hearings were sobering. Anthony appeared before the judge via video from jail, a stark contrast to the violent figure described in police reports. The courtroom remained quiet as the judge denied him bail, citing his criminal history, the brutal nature of the crime, and the clear danger he posed to the public. It was a significant step in preventing him from harming anyone else while awaiting trial. As legal teams began preparing their cases, the details surrounding Charmaine's tragic death slowly emerged. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man with a pattern of violence and a history of controlling behavior. Despite Charmaine's efforts to distance herself from him and build a better life, the past had come crashing into her present in the most horrific way. The prosecution's aim was clear: to ensure Anthony James was held fully accountable for his actions. Meanwhile, Charmaine's family began the delicate and painful task of navigating the legal system while still processing their grief. Advocates and victim support services stepped in, helping the children and family understand what was happening in court, what each stage of the proceedings meant, and how they could share Charmaine's voice in a system that can sometimes feel cold and procedural. Community members, too, attended hearings in quiet solidarity, often wearing shirts with Charmaine's name or lighting candles outside the courthouse. Their presence reminded everyone that Charmaine wasn't just a case number or headline. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend. The legal process, while necessary, became deeply personal for all involved. The defense, on the other hand, offered little in the way of public comment. As is often the case in high-profile domestic violence cases, the focus shifted to Anthony's past, mental health history, and behavior patterns. But for the prosecution and Charmaine's loved ones, these details only reinforce a sense that this tragedy could and should have been prevented. The system, they argued, had multiple opportunities to intervene before it was too late. As the case progressed, the trial date loomed. For Charmaine's children, the thought of facing a man who shattered their lives was terrifying. Yet, supported by counselors and trauma-informed advocates, they found strength in each other and in the growing chorus of voices demanding justice. The legal battle was far from over, but step by step, Charmaine's story was being honored, and her killer would face the consequences. The loss of Charmaine Forpool rippled far beyond the four walls of her home. For her 5 children, the pain was immediate and incomprehensible. They had not only lost their mother, they had witnessed her brutal final moments, a trauma no child should ever endure. Charmaine had been their rock, their comfort, their source of love and stability. In an instant, all of that was stolen. Family members and counselors stepped in to surround the children with as much love and care as possible, but no one could replace what had been lost. Charmaine's loved ones described her as a beautiful soul, gentle, kind, and devoted to her children. She worked hard to give them a better life, often put her own needs aside to ensure they had food, shelter, and smiles on their faces. In the weeks following her death, friends and relatives shared story after story about Charmaine's generosity, her laughter, and the way she always made people feel seen and valued. Her absence left a gaping hole in their hearts. The Grand Rapids community, too, was deeply shaken. This tragedy was not just another crime. It was a gut-wrenching reminder of how domestic violence can devastate lives right next door. Neighbors gathered for vigils, holding candles and wearing purple ribbons in Charmaine's honor. People who had never met her mourned as if she were their own, because her story could so easily be that of a sister, a friend, or a coworker. The outpouring of grief was matched by an outpouring of support. Local organizations rallied to raise awareness about domestic violence, offering educational workshops, support services, and resources for survivors. Charmaine's death became a heartbreaking wake-up call, prompting difficult but necessary conversations about how communities can do better, how friends, neighbors, and systems can respond before tragedy strikes. Many question how the signs were missed and what more could have been done to protect her. Fundraisers were launched to support Charmaine's children, who now face a future filled with uncertainty and healing. The generosity of strangers poured in from across the state and beyond. People donated clothes, school supplies, and meals. A GoFundMe page quickly surpassed its goal, a testament to how many lives Charmaine had touched and how many people wanted to ease her children's burden in any way they could. Teachers and school counselors created safe spaces for Charmaine's children to process their grief, offering counseling and emotional support. Mental health professionals stepped up to help guide the family through the immense trauma, knowing that healing wouldn't come quickly, but that it could come with time and care. The children were surrounded by love, even in the depths of their loss. Through the heartbreak, Charmaine's memory lives on. Her story has become a symbol of both profound tragedy and unyielding strength. The community continues to speak her name, to remember her kindness, and to fight for change in her honor. While nothing can undo what happened, those left behind are doing their best to carry forward her light, ensuring her legacy is one of compassion, justice, and love. Charmaine Forpool's tragic death brings to light the painful reality that domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of age, background, or status. It often unfolds behind closed doors, hidden in silence and shame. Many survivors live in fear, unsure where to turn or whether they will be believed. Charmaine's story, as heartbreaking as it is, reminds us of how urgent it is to take domestic violence seriously, not just after tragedy, but every day, in every household, and in every community. Domestic violence doesn't always begin with physical harm. It can start with controlling behavior, verbal abuse, financial restrictions, or emotional manipulation. These warning signs often escalate over time. In Charmaine's case, it's clear that there had been a troubled history in her relationship. Sadly, these red flags are sometimes overlooked or minimized until the situation turns deadly. That's why education, both in schools and communities, is so critical. When we recognize the signs early, we can act before lives are lost. Prevention starts with awareness, but it continues with action. Communities must ensure that resources for survivors are accessible, well-funded, and visible. Safe shelters, confidential hotlines, legal aid, and mental health services must be readily available and widely promoted. Survivors should never feel like they have nowhere to turn. They should never feel ashamed of seeking help. Creating a culture of support, not judgment, is essential. Friends, family members, co-workers, and neighbors also play a vital role. Often, someone close to the survivor notices something is wrong. Speaking up gently and without pressure can sometimes plant the seed for change. Offering a listening ear, researching local resources, or helping with a safety plan can save lives. Sometimes, just knowing someone cares makes all the difference. Accountability must extend beyond the abuser to the systems and institutions that are supposed to protect people. Law enforcement, the courts, and social services must be trained to handle domestic violence cases with sensitivity and urgency. It's not enough to respond after an act of violence has occurred. Prevention means taking threats seriously, enforcing restraining orders, and ensuring that survivors are treated with respect and believed when they come forward. Community-led initiatives can also be powerful tools for prevention. Faith groups, schools, workplaces, and civic organizations can all become safe spaces where conversations about healthy relationships and warning signs are encouraged. When communities come together and make it clear that abuse is not tolerated, it helps break the cycle of silence and fear. Love, respect, and empathy must become the loudest voices in our neighborhoods. Ultimately, preventing domestic violence is about more than one case or one tragedy. It's about creating a world where every person feels safe and valued in their own home. It's about honoring Charmaine's life by fighting for others still trapped in silence. Her story may have ended in unimaginable heartbreak, but it also ignites a call for hope, awareness, and action. And in her name, we move forward, not just mourning what was lost, but protecting what must never be taken again. Charmaine Fourpool's case doesn't just raise red flags about domestic violence. It also touches on the broader and deeply troubling issue of violence in our communities, especially when weapons are involved. While her life was taken by stabbing, the underlying conversation of interpersonal violence still intersects heavily with issues of access to weapons, safety protocols, and how communities respond to escalating threats. When violence erupts, regardless of the weapon, it leaves lasting scars, not only on victims but on families, neighbors, and entire communities. In communities across the country, especially those already struggling with limited resources, gun and weapon-related violence adds another layer of fear and trauma. Every tragedy like Charmaine's is a reminder that safety is not a given for many people. It's something they must fight for daily. Whether it's through controlling relationships or neighborhood crime, too many individuals live in environments where violence feels just one argument away. That's why proactive measures, like community outreach programs, conflict resolution initiatives, and accessible safety planning resources, are so essential. Community accountability plays a crucial role in prevention. It's not only about what law enforcement can do, but also what neighbors, schools, local leaders, and grassroots organizations can do. Creating a culture of vigilance, support, and intervention helps stop violence before it escalates. We need spaces where people feel comfortable reporting concerns, seeking help, and finding protection. No one should feel like they're dealing with danger in isolation. Another key factor is addressing the trauma that violence leaves behind. Charmaine's 5 children witnessed the unthinkable, and their healing will take time, patience, and consistent emotional support. The same is true for countless others who live with the aftermath of violence. Mental health services must be a top priority, not just for survivors, but for entire communities affected by loss. Helping children, families, and neighbors process what they've endured is how we begin to mend broken trust and restore a sense of security. We also need to ask hard questions about how people with histories of violence are able to continue harming others. Systems that should flag and stop dangerous individuals sometimes fail, whether through lack of follow-up, miscommunication, or limited legal authority. Charmaine's death reminds us that repeated threats and patterns of abuse must be taken seriously. Accountability must be built into the justice system, the healthcare system, and the community itself to ensure that red flags aren't ignored. Efforts to address violence must be holistic. This means investing in education, job opportunities, mental health resources, and housing stability, all of which can contribute to safer, healthier communities. When people have support systems, when they're connected to one another, and when basic needs are met, the likelihood of violence drops. We cannot talk about safety without also talking about equity and access. Ultimately, Charmaine's story calls us to rise as a collective, to be the kind of community that refuses to look the other way. Whether it's domestic violence, gun violence, or any other form of harm, our response must be swift, compassionate, and rooted in justice. We owe it to her memory and to every other life lost too soon to build a safer world, one where no one has to live in fear behind closed doors. Charmaine Fourpool's story is one that shakes us to the core, not just because of the horrific way she lost her life, but because of how familiar this kind of tragedy has become. A vibrant, loving mother taken far too soon, in front of the very children she lived and sacrificed for. Her loss is not just her family's loss. It's our loss too. As a society, when we fail to protect the most vulnerable among us, we all share a part of that burden. Behind the headlines and brief news flashes are real people with real lives, and Charmaine was one of them. She had dreams, laughter, struggles, and victories. She worked hard to support her 5 children, doing her best every single day despite life's pressures. She didn't deserve to die. Her children didn't deserve to witness her murder. No child should have to carry that weight on their hearts for the rest of their lives. If there's one thing we take from this heartbreaking case, let it be this. We must pay attention to the quiet cries for help. So many people live in fear, trapped in unhealthy relationships, silenced by threats, or ignored when they ask for help. We must become better listeners, more active protectors, and stronger advocates. It's not enough to say, "That's not my business." If someone's safety is at stake, it becomes everyone's business. This is also a time to reflect on what kind of community we want to build. Do we want to be the kind of neighbors who look the other way, or the ones who step up when something doesn't feel right? Do we create space for victims to speak out without judgment, or do we allow shame and fear to keep them quiet? These are questions we must ask ourselves, not just when tragedy strikes, but every day. We can also push for more robust legal protections, more accessible shelters and safe havens, and more effective intervention strategies for individuals in abusive situations. We can support organizations that work tirelessly to educate, intervene, and support families in crisis. Even a small donation, a shared post, or a few volunteer hours can go a long way in building the kind of safety net Charmaine needed. It's also time to hold systems accountable. The justice system, the healthcare system, schools, and social services. When red flags are raised, they must be acted upon. Threats must not be dismissed as empty or exaggerated. Lives are at stake. We must insist that these institutions work together, communicate more effectively, and never allow another case to fall through the cracks. And to those living in fear right now, please know this. You are not alone. There is help out there. You are worthy of love, respect, and safety. It might feel impossible to reach out, but there are people who care, people who will believe you, and people who will stand with you. Your life matters. Your peace matters. Your future matters. Let Charmaine's name not be forgotten. Let it become a symbol of both sorrow and change, a reminder of the lives we must protect, the systems we must improve, and the courage it takes to demand better. Say her name not just in mourning, but in purpose. Let it echo in courtrooms, schools, and homes where silence once lived. We honor Charmaine by standing up. For her children, for other victims, and for a world where love is never used as a weapon. Change starts with awareness, but it doesn't end there. It requires action. Every voice raised, every law passed, every survivor supported brings us closer to a safer, more compassionate world. So as you turn off this video or close this story, ask yourself, what can I do? Maybe it's checking in on a friend. Maybe it's learning the signs of abuse. Maybe it's making a donation or advocating for new policy. Whatever it is, do something, because Charmaine Forpool deserved better. And so does every woman, every mother, every child whose life is still hanging in the balance.